This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
I did it again, all. I failed to prepare ahead of time. By that I mean I forgot to look ahead for what was coming with the retro NWA shows on the Superstation. I got all excited on Saturday, and then it turns out they didn't air a Saturday night show after the Clash. Which I find odd because the following week was Independence Day. I mean, I'd have thought if they were not going to air a Saturday night syndicated show, it would have been the weekend of July the 4th. But that's something that you'll just have to know for the upcoming Friday podcast. It'll be a solo Mid-South review. It has absolutely nothing to do with the subject of today's show, but figured I'd address it now before I evidently forget to mention it at the end. I'm also going to keep better track of time here because I was really pushing it the other week with the Raw review. I literally finished that recording session and then immediately had to book it to church for a 9 a.m. call. It was kind of dicey there for a minute. So the goal is to make sure I don't spend an hour and a half talking about the show this week. The question is, will that come back to bite me? Depends on how many tirades I get into. But let me go ahead and get the channel plugs out of the way. If you're tuned into the 5 Starr Wrestling Report for the first time, make sure you subscribe, comment, and leave a like. We are the wrestling podcast no one knows but everyone needs. Seeing as how my weekend schedule wasn't too bad, that'll give me ample enough time to sit down and edit this later in the afternoon. I'm also still juggling a lot of personal things right now on top of that, so I kind of need it. But for now, it is time to yet again dive into the war zone, both in the metaphorical and literal sense. God, these Raw shows. They're killing me, dude. Killing me. I remember when I used to complain about Raw being an hour every week. When they went to 2 earlier this year, I was like, I'm going to be optimistic. I don't think it'll be as painful as I recall. Oh, how I've quickly learned. No, they're still equally as painful. Last week proved to be the best definition of a show where just because you can hypothetically cram in 4 hours of material into 2, doesn't mean you should. A life hack that I think, frankly, a lot of modern bookers would probably benefit from knowing. See one Mr. Tony Cocaine Khan. But this is where the formula was born. The Monday Night Wars. Even during the pre-Attitude Era stages. At least the formal Attitude Era. Last week I know I spent almost an hour and a half trying to run everything down. I spent just as long talking about the show as the actual runtime was. I'll try not to do the same this week, although no promises. I was already really pressed for time this weekend in terms of actually sitting down to or watch all these shows. My entire Friday night got eaten up with, well, phone calls. So I had to be super honed in on everything I was watching because I tried to do it all before I went to bed. So we opened with the new Nation coming out for a promo. Last week was the show where Ahmed Johnson turned heel and joined the group for, what basically amounted to be like 2 months before they switched him back. But it's him, Farouk, Kama Mustafa, and D'Lo Brown as the 4 core guys. They're now sporting the more official Nation look. The look that I think most people recall when they look back at the group. And so Vince properly begins with directly going to Ahmed and asking him the obvious question, why? To which Ahmed responded by calling Vince white man. Said that he tried to do everything by the book and be the nice guy, and it got him absolutely nowhere. Said nobody backed him up, including Vince when he came back to the WWF from his injury and wanted a shot at the title. I particularly laughed when he brought up how it was the Nation that backed him up the other week in that tag match. They were the ones who were looking out for his best interests. You mean the guys that single-handedly destroyed The Undertaker in a glorified handicap match while you stood on the apron and played with your dick the whole time? Those guys, huh? All right, then. For the record, I'm reviewing all this in my best attempts to actually recite what Ahmed said. You all know his ability when it comes to speaking coherently. The answer is not well. And so after he called out The Undertaker, we had D'Lo and Farouk chiming in with some verbiage. I think this is the first official promo we heard from D'Lo Brown in the WWF, which was actually kind of bizarre. Like, if you think about it, in the original group, D'Lo was just a body. Remember they brought him in when Farouk was recruiting all those plants to stand in the backdrop and do the black fist symbol? D'Lo was amongst that crew. He was just as worthless as Crush and Savio at one point. In fact, he was probably lower on the totem pole than they were. Now he's out there talking about how this new Nation is the most dominant force in all of wrestling, that they're the most lethal, dangerous group in all of the WWF. And I'm like, dude, you were a fucking bit player for 8 months. Shut the fuck up. And so then, well, after Ahmed verbally threatened the owner of the company and vowed physical abuse if he looked sideways at the Nation one more time, we also had Kama mentioning that he single-handedly destroyed and beat The Undertaker clean in the middle of the ring last week, which is a fact. He said he's proud of the group, specifically Ahmed, for stepping up and showing that they can conquer the WWF by any means necessary, which is their motto. And so, well, just when you think they're about to move on, who should show up on motorcycles but Crush, Brian Lee, and the Harris twins? They all ride out to the ring on their own separate bikes, sporting what were essentially out-and-out biker gang street clothes. And they all get in the ring. Crush formally introduces a real brotherhood. They are formerly known as the DOA, the Disciples of Apocalypse. Yeah, that's right. Crush, who 1 week ago was a member of the Nation. 7 days later, he's now completely changed his look, bought himself a gold chain necklace, a bandana, a black wife beater, and pants. Oh, he's also purchased his own personal bike. And he is now the ringleader, the cult leader of a biker gang. He found himself 3 random friends, all of whom he claimed are good pals who ride together at all times. And now they're all here in the WWF to beat up the Nation. Now, you might think that's a little impractical if you're a somewhat level-headed person. I wouldn't even say it was so much the new look that was hard to buy. But when he said, yeah, we're all real friends. We ride together, we eat together, we drink together, we do everything together. I'm like, dude, it's been 1 week. How much time are you guys actually spending together? It's a little creepy. I was expecting him at one point to say we sleep together. Then it would have really been weird. And, like, I know these guys eventually all get new names. We know who Crush is, obviously. Brian Lee and the Harris Boys, they get new names too, and I'm trying to offhand remember what they were. I think Brian Lee was Skull, and the Harris brothers were some like Chains and 8 Ball or something. They're all goofy street names. I'll probably just end up calling them Brian Lee and the Harris Boys because that's how I've always identified them. Keeping in mind, too, that I'm also viewing this with 20 plus years of retrospective history. Are these guys supposed to be heels or baby faces? They were definitely baby faces here. But I'm like 90% sure their run was primarily as heels. And visually, this brawl, good Lord. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but a lot of it just seemed off. I think the biggest issue was they just took 8 generic guys in black clothes and had them do a street fight. Like, nobody stood out. And they literally just introduced this new group, and without even identifying the individual members, they're already getting into a Pier 6 brawl with the alleged top heel faction in the WWF. Well, second top heel faction if you want to count the Hart Foundation. It was just very rushed into. And I'm not going to pretend like I remember every solitary detail about the DOA and the WWF. And didn't Crush leave after Montreal in November? Because I remember he showed up on Nitro and joined the NWO like right afterward. And then Lee and the Harris twins stuck around for a little bit afterward. Literally, the whole purpose of them forming this biker gang was to give the Nation a set of babyfaces to feud with. And then the whole thing lasted like 3 months before it was dropped. And unlike what they did with the Nation, where they cycled through various names, with the DOA, they were like, nah, fuck it, move on. Whatever. And so then we had this Road Warrior promo in the locker room where they vowed that tonight, all hell will break loose in their match with dramatic pause. the Godwins. More to come on that later. That led us to this Ken Shamrock versus Rockabilly squash, with Dan Severn making his WWF debut on commentary. That was neat. I forgot Dan showed up in the WWF around this point. He was the current NWA World Heavyweight Champion for whatever that was worth in 1997. About as much as the Western States Heritage title meant once upon a time in the NWA. They mentioned that Dan had faced Shamrock twice in MMA combat, so apparently he was qualified to speak about Shamrock's background here. I just like how they've now resorted to using Billy Gunn as a standard TV jobber. He's still doing the Rockabilly gimmick, but at this point they know it's a failed experiment. So now they're just out there throwing him to be fed to the wolves. We did have an Elvis impersonator sitting behind Dan on commentary, which I could not take my eyes off of. Every time they showed Dan in the picture-in-picture, I couldn't listen to a word he said because I couldn't stop staring at this idiot in the Elvis gear. Can you imagine people who used to travel to buildings like that? Wasn't that long ago? Wasn't there a Raw where somebody showed up in a gold dust suit with like the face makeup and everything? Goofballs. So, well, this match sucked. It was about 3 minutes of wasted attempts at heat from Billy until Shamrock hit an out-of-nowhere belly-to-belly. And then he slapped on the ankle lock for the submission win. Then they did the swerve deal afterward where they teased that he and Dan were going to get into a fight. But instead they shook hands and showed admirable signs of respect. It was odd. I specifically recall Dan being heavily involved in that botched NWA invasion thing in 98. I don't ever recall him being around the WWF in 97, though. Did he do anything between now and that invasion angle next year? Because if he did, I certainly don't remember anything. I also don't remember him being a babyface, but I mean, again, we're talking about a period where nobody knew who the fucking faces and heels were. So it really didn't matter. Strange segment, but it was harmless enough. What was strange was this next match. Okay. I know I did like a 15-minute tangent the other week about this whole Godwin situation. But now that I'm seeing the fallout from it, I'm even more shocked and perplexed. This was not a fever dream. This was not a rib. On Raw, this week, they booked the Road Warriors versus the Godwins. The Godwins, who you might recall less than 2 months ago, Henry Godwin was dropped on his neck and suffered a broken C4 vertebrae at the hands of a botched doomsday device. A clip that they showed multiple times before this match. We could see, clear as day, this man was dropped directly on top of his head. A ruptured C4 vertebrae less than 2 months ago. Not years, months. He is now back on Raw, not just back in the sense of being physically active on the show. He is back competing in matches. First of all, how? And second of all, was this formally cleared by the WWF medical staff? How the fuck did this pass their protocol? I know the WWF was pretty lax during this time when it came to concussion protocol or injury etiquette. I mean, there were a lot of guys wrestling out there that probably had no business being in the ring when they were hurt. But a man landed on the back of his neck and was nearly killed on this show for a shoot. How in the world was he now physically healthy enough to compete in the ring again? I think I have to revert back to something I said about Henry Godwin the other week. He may have been Iron Man. Not a doppelganger, but the real deal. Because I have no other explanation as to how this is humanly possible. Not to mention, too, this was a tournament round. Yes, you know, the tournament that they're currently holding to find challengers for Steve Austin and a mystery partner yet to be identified. The one who's replacing Shawn after he got laid out by Bret Hart in the locker room and walked out of the company for 6 weeks. Also a shoot. Yeah, this is part of that whole escapade. I mean, at least they bothered to put up a graphic this week to show who's actually competing in this fucking thing. After seeing the brackets, I was not all too impressed with the competition. But now that we've gotten the precursor talk out of the way, they proceed to have this Hoss fight style tag match where Henry's out there taking normal bumps like that neck injury never occurred. And just to make matters sound even more ludicrous and absurd, just when you thought things couldn't have made less sense, not only did they beat the returning Henry Godwin here in about 3 minutes with a crappy lariat, they then proceeded, the Godwins did, to attack the Road Warriors and then hit him with the slop bucket, facilitating what I have to assume was an official heel turn. The Hog Farmers. A wrestler returned from a career-threatening neck injury. His first match back, he lost, and he turned heel. It makes sense in the minds of the twisted fucks that booked and formatted this segment. But to normal, sane people who actually like to logically make conclusions in life, it makes, well, not even virtually no sense. It practically makes no sense. In fact, I will go a step above and say this was fucking idiotic. Now, I have my own belief as to who was fully responsible for putting this shit show together. But let's just omit that part of the conversation for a minute and try to think about how you could justify something this stupid. It's one thing for them to bring Henry Godwin back after he suffered a horrible neck injury that basically threatened his livelihood. As a promoter, as a booker, how do you look at something like that and in your first instinct think, well, we've got to turn him heel. We must have the people hate this man for coming back from a neck injury. It is a perverse type of stupidity that can only be rationalized as Vince Russo is a goddamn idiot who has the worst case of ADHD in recorded human history. That's my only conclusion. I know it's far-fetched, but I think I might be onto something here with my theory. Vince Russo, not a bright man. Write that one down for future reference. The fact that something like that even occurred, it makes me think that Vince McMahon didn't even try to filter that out. He probably looked at that on paper and said, it's gotta be done. Make it happen. Like, even McMahon didn't give a shit. We also had the Hart Foundation running out to beat up the Road Warriors. I don't know why. Why not? Why not cram in more shit in a segment that already had way too much shit going on? And we followed that with The Undertaker goozling Paul Bearer and Vader in the locker room. As if that was not going to backfire on The Undertaker, with Paul threatening Taker with revealing his dark secret week after week. Taker physically assaulted Paul here. No ramifications, apparently. All he did was mention the fire. Then Taker let go and walked away. It was a trigger word. And then we eventually got Flash Funk versus Sabu in another ECW cross-promotional match. I will spare you the long tirade about the ECW versus WWF storyline they revisited the other week. After not mentioning anything about it for 4 months, if you've seen a Sabu match in your life, well, you kind of know the style you're dealing with here. Sabu was going to have his match, regardless of whether or not you knew how to accommodate that style, which did not lend itself to a great encounter when Flash Funk had to work with him here. In sum, it was very sloppy and very much a Sabu match. Not to speak ill of the dead, I'm just calling it like it is. He did all of his usual high-risk offense where he just kind of throws his body in the general vicinity of where you're standing, and you're just praying to God that he doesn't clip you in the back of the head with his knee, or any other bodily limbs for that matter. And just to cut to the chase, because the rest of this really didn't matter. They had Bill Alfonso out there blowing his goddamn whistle the whole time, which is not annoying in the slightest, by the way. And then we get the classic Sabu finish where he goes to set up a table in an attempt to put Flash through it. And of course, the table doesn't break on all attempts at Sabu trying to throw his body weight through the fucking thing. 3 times. He tried 3 times to put Flash through this table. Failure. I liked how Paulie had to comment, well, you see, these tables aren't pre-cut like the tables you see Public Enemy use on Nitro. So this makes Sabu even more badass. No, Paul, it just kind of makes Sabu look like an idiot. By the way, anytime you hear somebody use the phrase pre-cut to describe a gimmick table, immediately disqualify that person from being an expert. I know Paul knows better. He was just being a dope. Yeah, this segment also sucked. We got the British Bulldog versus Mankind. A standard pro wrestling match with 2 guys with no gimmicks attached. What a breath of fresh air on this program. Mankind came out wearing a sign around his neck that read, "Pick me, Steve." Because he's still pushing for Steve to pick him as a tag partner. He was also wearing a Stone Cold t-shirt. Good product placement. It's funny, they actually had Steve call in from that 1-800-COLLECT number. Apparently he's selling some kind of knee injury or something, which explained why he wasn't on TV this week. I just liked how the gist of his promo was him threatening Vince and saying to never have him call the collect number again, elsewise he'd beat his ass. I guess they weren't footing the bill for Steve when he called in. Which I find rich. That is a total WWF thing to do. Hey Steve, we need you to call in live to Raw to do some commentary for this Mankind match. But we're not paying for you to use the collect number. That's coming out of your pocket, brother. I'd be pissed too. The match overall was fine for the 2.5 minutes it went. There was a spot where Bulldog and Mankind took a flip bump out to the floor, and Bulldog very briefly sold that he hyperextended his knee, which ultimately led to nothing. And then after Mankind countered the power slam and tried to lock in the mandible claw, Davey kicked him low so he could grab a chair and use it on Mankind to force a disqualification. After which he proceeded to level Mankind with an unprotected chair shot right to the side of the head. This led to Mankind immediately getting up and putting the mandible claw on Bulldog before he bailed out. By the way, that unprotected chair shot that Davey gave him, this was not like that Bill Watts segment on Mid-South a few weeks ago where he looked like an elderly man whiffing somebody with a pillow. This was Davey swinging a chair full force against the side of Mankind's cranium. I just shook my head. It's only going to get substantially worse from now, people. At least Mankind saw this one coming. Wait until The Rock does it blindly to the back of his head. And then we got the best segment on the show this week. As Owen Hart is in the back chewing out Gorilla Monsoon, complaining about the upcoming triple threat he has to have with Hunter and Goldust, here's his entire argument. Hunter's got a broad. Goldust has a broad. They have someone in their corner. Therefore, I want Brian Pillman in my corner tonight. That way it's an even playing field. To which Monsoon goes, all right, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But you see, Owen Hart, he's not smart. So even when he gets the stamp of approval to have Pillman in his corner, Owen is still bitching about the girls being in Hunter and Goldust's corner. So they cycle through this gag like 3 times with Monsoon going, dude, fine, Pillman can be in your corner. And it takes Pat Patterson, of all people, to finally be like, did you not hear him, Owen? He said you're fine to bring Al Bryan in your corner tonight. Will you please shut up? And then Owen finally goes, see, Bryan, I told you he'd give us what we want. Best thing on the entire show, no question. I love everything about numbskull Owen Hart on this show. It never gets old. He's the best toady flunky heel. By the way, directed toward Gorilla Monsoon in this equation, can you explain how it's fair that Chyna and Marlena can be in the corner for Hunter and Goldust, but Brian Pillman is considered of equal standing as the corner man for Owen? I find that logic quite faulty. 2 of these individuals involved are girls. Well, 1.5. The other is a full-grown adult man. A crazy one at that. But apparently no one took issue. All the babyfaces collectively decided, yeah, this all seems fair. So they're all dipshits in storyline. Great. And so at the top of the hour, we get this 3-way Intercontinental Championship match with Hunter, Goldust, and Owen. And the only reason I didn't immediately skip ahead for a match involving Hunter and Goldust was purely because Owen was involved. Had it been anyone else, I'd have probably gotten up to take a leak. We also had Pat Patterson as the special guest referee for no apparent reason other than he was the first recognized Intercontinental Champion for the WWF. He won it in Rio de Janeiro, you know, in a tournament. Right. Totally not kayfabe. You know, it's been a while since I've done the rant about multi-man matches in wrestling. Funny to think we haven't really seen too many of those up to this point, at least in the WWF. Generally, I'm just not a fan of 3-ways or 4-ways. I can at least make a claim that before they got ridiculously overdone in the modern era, they used to be viewed as special attractions. For me, a lot of the conversation really boils down to, is there a storyline reason for it happening? I mean, if you're just throwing a random multi-person match out there for shits and giggles, it always comes off like a lazy excuse to just shoehorn people into segments. When they announced this 3-way at the top of the program, that's what it came across like. And or another lazy excuse for them to book another Triple H Goldust match. Just throwing an extra body in there this time. So they do the match, which is rushed all to hell because they have way too much crap going on in an already over-crammed 2-hour program. And at the finish, well, the fake-out finish, I should add, they have Goldust pin Owen while his foot was under the bottom rope. The foot that Pillman placed under there during the pinfall attempt. But of course, Pat didn't see this ahead of time, so he awards the belt to Goldust as a result. And they go through this rigmarole of having Earl Hebner and Gorilla Monsoon come out to argue that Pillman placed Owen's foot under the bottom rope. Long story short, they restart the match after a commercial break, wherein they go another few minutes until the overbooked clusterfuck at the end, where as Triple H and Owen are fighting on the floor, Chyna hits the ring and gives Goldust, not kidding you, a Hurricane Rana. I was shocked to see Dustin was even brave enough to actually let this woman give him that move. Much less being the poor sap who had to take it. And that led to this comically bad finish where, as Owen is going for a pin on Hunter, Goldust tries to come off the top with a big splash, but Owen moves out of the way, so Goldust accidentally hits Hunter instead. And then Owen basically shoots Goldust away so he could pin Hunter directly after the fact. It made Dustin look like such a tool. He missed a splash because Owen moved like 2 inches to his right, and all Owen had to do was gently nudge him to the side. And then he got the pin on Hunter. By the way, you're King of the Ring winner, I should add. He was the one ultimately doing the job here. I will say, and this is me just kind of grasping at straws here, at least this didn't break down into the usual multi-man thing where it's two guys doing spots in the ring while the third guy lays out on the floor waiting for his cue to hit the ring and do some kind of dramatic pinfall breakup. They, at least for the most part, kept all three guys in the ring at the same time doing stuff. So it wasn't totally contrived. Not as contrived as seeing Chyna giving a Hurricane Rana to a grown adult man. It's probably why they had Dustin be the one to take it. They were like, if anybody's capable of protecting Chyna from hurting herself, he's the guy to do it. Again, it would be far less ridiculous if Dustin wasn't a grown man who weighed somewhere in the ballpark of 250 pounds. But, they've already broken that boundary by having Chyna get physical with so many of the male wrestlers anyway, so bloom's already off the rose. And then we get Brett and Neidhart coming out for a promo while they were promoting the upcoming 10-man tag for Calgary. Brett talked about the Hart Foundation, how it's the best team in the WWF. He ran down all the individual members of the babyface side. And then he started calling out Tom Hitman Hearns, the pro boxer who they plugged at ringside in hour one. As soon as they put him on screen, you had to figure he was going to get involved in the show somehow. And boy, did he ever. So the Hitman's out there calling him a chicken and this, that, and the other thing. So there's only one room for a hitman in the WWF. And he doesn't think Hearns has the balls to step up and prove that he's the real deal. So that naturally leads to Hearns breaking through the ringside barricade. He is not immediately flanked by security and tackled. So the whole thing's a blatant work. Which of course does nothing but incentivize regular Mark fans to do the same kind of shit when the wrestlers are calling them out. So overall, not a good sign. And after a heated exchange between him and the Hart Foundation, he ends up laying out Neidhart with a right hand. Then they send out agents to kind of break up the fight between him and Brett. So there's your publicity stunt segment for the week. The thing about it is, on the surface, it wasn't a bad segment. Didn't do a damn thing to boost the ratings. But I mean, they got a celebrity on TV, and objectively, the punch looked good. But what was the follow-up? Was there follow-up? I don't believe so. I don't remember Tom Hearns ever being mentioned on this program after the fact. Moreover, was anybody going to remember this segment the week after it aired? I mean, I surely never recalled it beforehand. It was also dumb in the fact that this guy laid out a talent with a knockout punch. And less than 5 minutes after the fact, he's back out there sitting at ringside like nothing ever happened. Just enjoying the rest of the program as a fan. Completely unbelievable. We all know what would happen if this were real. Hearns would have been forcibly escorted out of the building and dumped on his ass. If he was lucky. The whole thing was absurd. Also, way to sell your fucking 10-man tag for the pay-per-view by having one of your active teammates get punched out like a complete job guy. But again, these people were so dumb. They weren't even thinking about shit like that. It's all about the ratings, bro. It's not even worth getting upset about. And I'm going to kind of skip over the Scott Taylor-Brian Christopher match. It was all a part of that light heavyweight division crap they were doing around this time. I already said my piece about it the other week when I reviewed that Bobby Fulton-Tommy Rogers match. Nobody cared about this. Lawler was out there on commentary putting over his son and talking about his credentials without directly ever mentioning that Brian was Jerry's son. He won with a flying leg drop. I guess it was kind of cool seeing Scotty and Brian in the ring working together. No pun intended. The two future teammates that formed Too Cool. Scott Taylor has worked squash matches on Raw in the last few years. Been a while since we've seen him, though. It's still weird seeing pictures of him before he became Scotty Too Hottie and got the wacky haircut. Before that look change, he was very indie looking. Honestly, that's all I care to comment on. And then we had the main event of The Undertaker and Vader versus Kama and D'Lo Brown. Another tournament round. And I know you're probably asking, how in the fuck did Vader and The Undertaker get paired together for this tournament? The answer is simple. They were both being managed by Paul Bearer. Simple enough explanation. Even though The Undertaker literally just threatened to choke Vader out in a pre-tape earlier in the show, now they're out there teaming up and perfectly willing to take on the Nation together. At least for about 5 minutes. They drew attention to the fact that Ahmed wasn't at ringside. He was in the back watching on a monitor because he injured his knee. They said that it took place in that brawl with the DOA in the opening segment. I don't specifically know how or when Ahmed got hurt, but I think this actually explains a lot why the WWF was so quick to flip him back babyface not too long from now. I mean, if he ends up actually being hurt and can't work on TV for a while, it really was a wasted heel turn. Speaking of the DOA, they all came out to get into a fight with the Nation at ringside, including the active members of guys involved in this tag match. Show of hands. Who thought this was grounds for a blatant disqualification? Well, if you raise your hand, you'll be sad to hear it was not a DQ. No, instead it was a commercial pitch to where after they came back, the DOA were gone. The match continued as if nothing just previously happened. And after a few minutes of Vader working over Kama and D'Lo, he and The Undertaker got into an arbitrary altercation over something. Taker leveled Vader with the right hand, which led to D'Lo hitting him with a lariat and getting the pinfall. I have no idea what set off this Undertaker-Vader confrontation. In fact, everything was going in their favor beforehand. There was no miscommunication spot. It was just Vader decided to be a dick. And Taker responded by saying, "Fuck you too, dude." And he punched him out. And it would appear, because of the Ahmed injury, which they had to have found out last minute, they are now rapidly changing course and having Vader be the one to challenge The Undertaker. And this was how they came up with it. They put them together in a random team for this tournament, eliminated them in round 1 after Vader got in Taker's face for no discernible reason. And then to make matters even better, the challenger for this match, he was laid out with a tombstone piledriver, made to look like a complete fool. And then Paul got on the mic and said that next week he was going to unveil Undertaker's secret. He's going to expose that The Undertaker was secretly a porn star before he became a pro wrestler. No, actually, that's not the big reveal. Although that would have been a hell of a twist. I have nothing else to add to that segment. That was the main event for Raw. They have now beaten The Undertaker twice in back-to-back weeks like a complete schlub. He is still the WWF champion. So like I said at the beginning, dude, these shows are breaking me week by week. I mean, there is so much more that I could get into when I'm trying to divulge what's happening in these segments. I just don't want these Raw reviews to go on for like 4 hours. It's not worth the stress. You know, on top of me trying to cram in TBS Superstation and Mid-South reviews over the weekend. I mean, if I spend too much time trying to do a deep dive into the mind of Vince Russo's idiocy, I might have to dedicate an entire new podcast to that. I mean, watch the shows, dude, if you don't believe me. I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. This is what we're getting with filtered Vince Russo. When he has to run the script by Vince McMahon first. God, I'd love to see what happens before Vince overturns decisions. Vince McMahon. Pronouns, pal. We still have one more show before the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view. Honestly, I'm just looking forward to getting a chance to see that 10-man tag again. Because that I remember being a damn good match. One could argue one of the best main event matches the WWF ran on pay-per-view all year. Probably the single best main event for an In Your House they ever ran as a company. So at least there's that to look forward to soon. But until then, we'll truck our way through one final show before the pay-per-view and See what wondrous horrors await us on the other side. I think I did this one in under an hour this week, so I will consider that a success. I think I might have enough time to take a poop, too, before I leave. But thanks, everybody, for checking out this train wreck of a podcast. It's very, very befitting of WWF Retro Raw during this time. Just the way we like it. So I'll catch you all this coming Friday for the Mid-South review, and still trying to figure out what my schedule is going to be like at the end of the month and sort of a lead into July. I'm going to try to keep the podcast going for the remainder of the month, but I'm going to... Well, I don't know yet. Not saying that I'm scrapping everything and stopping the shows altogether. Just there might be a couple week hiatus, which is not work related this time, personal life related. But I'll talk to you all soon and appreciate y'all. Take care and peace out.